They will never get them and then castrate them. They would bypass this law because in Islamic law you can't castrate. So they would buy them pre-castrated, already done and whatnot, and then they would buy them in these slave markets. According to the Jewish Israeli historian Amnon Cohen, Jews used the Sharia over 1,000 times. And the reason for this is that they found it more efficient. Islamic inheritance laws were much better than Jewish inheritance laws in terms of for the daughters.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Welcome back, Pablo. How you doing?
Jazakallah khair. Alhamdulillah, I'm doing good. I appreciate for bringing me on for a third time. Very excited
I
for
mean,
this
I'm
topic.
excited to have you again as well, for sure.
I've been dying to do this topic. I've been messaging you for like a month saying I'm gonna do it. But Qadar Allah, I've been so busy with my trip to
Trip.
Spain and then other things that I had to do. So Alhamdulillah, we're here now. I've got my thoughts that I'm gonna do. I've got my notes. I've got my ideas. So yeah, let's get into this.
Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah. So today the topic would be about the Ottoman Empire.
hmm
So let's start with the history. Who are the Ottomans? Where do they come from?
Okay, so the Ottomans are Turks. Yeah, as we all know, Ottoman Turks. The Turks don't originate in Europe. They don't originate in Anatolia, but rather they originate in Central Asia. Some people even say the Altai Mountains, which is near Mongolia, and East Turkestan, which is where the Uyghurs live. That's what many people say the Turks originate from. And over time, they slowly migrate and they reach Central Asia, which is not that far away from East Turkestan, um, and they migrate there. Um, and they prop up several Turkic dynasties. One such example is the Great Khaganate, I think it's called. The name's escaping me. And there was another one called the Kara Khanate, which, subhanAllah, one of the rulers becomes Muslim by the name of Sultan Satuk Burha Khan. So we got the Turks in Central Asia. Um, Another notable Turk that becomes Muslim in Central Asia is Seljuk, and he becomes Muslim in 985 CE, about 300 years after the birth of Islam. So he becomes Muslim, but it's not him who establishes the Seljuk Empire. It's his grandson, Tughril Bey, in 1037, and he establishes the Seljuk Empire in like Greater Persia, Khorasan, modern day Iran, and whatnot. And this empire expands massively. Um, and in only about 40 years, they reach Eastern Anatolia, the modern day city called Malazgirt. But back then it was called Manzikert. So the famous Battle of Manzikert of 1071 CE, and they defeat the Byzantines or the Eastern Roman Empire. And this starts the migration of Turks into Anatolia from Greater Persia, from Central Asia. They start migrating into Anatolia. However, um, we still have like it's not completely Turkish at this point. It's minority. However, over time they continue migrating, and one key event in history is the devastation caused by the Mongol invasions during the 13th century. So a lot of people flee. So, for example, in Central Asia, there was people that fled, like these administrators, these scholars, these poets, all these people, they migrated to different areas. So you have many migrating to India, but you also have many migrating to Anatolia. A lot of Turks migrate to Anatolia. And one of these is by the name of Gunduz Alp. And this is very controversial because some people say he is Suleiman Shah, other people say it's Gunduz Alp. But most historians agree it was Gunduz Alp, not Suleiman Shah, because we have a coin of it says Osman bin Ertuğrul bin Gunduz Alp. So it shows that um his name was Gunduz Alp, and he flees the devastation caused by the Mongols. Because you have to think about it, what the Mongols done in Central Asia and across the Muslim world, it was madness.
Mhm.
Like millions and millions of people were killed in different cities, especially the Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia. About, I think, 1 million people died in one city. It was either Merv or Herat, one of those cities, 1 million people. Like some cities, didn't like in London, the population was less than 50,000. In Paris, it was less than 100,000. So 1 million people died in that city alone, subhanAllah. So Gunduz Alp reaches Anatolia. Then his son, this is where the division, sorry, of the K tribe occurs. And so his son, Ertugrul, becomes the leader, and he's basically the chief and whatnot. Then he's given some land in Sugut in northwestern Anatolia. Or sorry, like it's western, central, northern Anatolia around there, near Constantinople,
Mhm.
between Constantinople, between Ankara, in there. So he's given some land called Sugut, the town of Sugut, and he starts conquering a little bit of the land. Then his son inherits Osman, and this is the start of the Ottoman dynasty. He then starts conquering other lands, Inogul, which is quite near, and
And
he starts.
these people were under which rule? Ottomani Empire, the Fatimid Empire, or the Abbasid Empire? Like I think they
So,
started out as. Mhm.
so in Anatolia, after the Seljuk Empire, reached its greatest extent, it started to fracture. So you have the Sultanate of Rome, then you have all these Turkic beyliks that were part of once the Seljuk Empire, but then they became independent. These were like petty states that you found, sorry, petty states that you find in Andalus, the Taifa. It's not called Taifa in Anatolia, it was called beyliks, but it's basically the same thing. Small Turkic rulers fighting over petty reasons.
Mhm.
So they were basically descendants of the Seljuk Empire, these ones, these beyliks. So Osman, so now we're at 1299. Osman the First, he begins conquering lands, like as I said, in a goal, and he sees himself as a Ghazi, a holy warrior, and he's trying to wage war in the name of Islam. So what he does is normally fight against the Byzantines and who he deems like non-Muslim and Islamic. So that's what he does. Um, One interesting thing, because this podcast is more about the religious coexistence, is that he starts the conquest of Bursa in 1317, and he dies in 1324. And in that very same year, this is where we get the first encounter of the Jewish population with the Ottomans, with the Ottoman dynasty. As the synagogue is in English, it's called the Tree of Life Synagogue, but in Hebrew, it's called the Etz Hayim Synagogue, and this is the first synagogue that comes under Ottoman jurisdiction. And according to Martin Gilbert in his book Ishmael's House, I have it right here, actually, right here. He says that the Jews actually helped the Ottomans in this conquest. And the reason for this is that the Ottomans treated the Jews much better than the Byzantines because there was legal restrictions, there was persecution, and also at the same time, the Byzantines were experiencing a lot of political instability.
And this is
Firstly,
still when the Ottomans haven't conquered Constantinople. So this is still
yeah, yeah.
within Anatolian region. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is about 100 years before,
Mhm.
120 years before the conquest of Constantinople. So they're just a small beylik that are just trying to conquer some lands. However, they conquer Bursa, which is a very rich and prosperous city. And so when, it's a big prize for the Ottomans. So the conquest is happening between still 1324. It completes in 1326 and it becomes the new Ottoman capital.
Mhm.
So yeah, the Jews help the Ottomans in this conquest. Um, they prefer, as I said before, they prefer Ottoman rule because they're given the status of the Dhimma, which is, they pay jizya for protection and they don't have to enroll in the military. So then the Ottomans continue. They capture Gallipoli in 1354 after there was an earthquake, then Ankara in 1360, and Edirne or Adrianople in 1361. And in all of these cities, according to Martin Gilbert, not me, not some Muslim propagandist, not some sheikh in the Medina. It's Martin Gilbert. He says that in every single city, the Jews helped the Ottomans to conquer it. Why? Because they preferred Ottoman rule. Because as I said, in Byzantine, they faced all these legal restrictions, economic hardships, and occasional outbreaks of violence and forced conversions. Because you've got to think about it in Europe, in Christian Europe at the time, medieval Europe was probably the worst period for the Jews in the continent because you had all these accusations of blood libels, which is basically where they would accuse Jews of murdering Christian boys and using their blood during Passover rituals and stuff like that.
Well,
So
why
yeah,
there was a certain, I mean, you said particularly during the Middle Ages. Like, what happened during the Middle Ages? Because Europe just came out from Dark Ages. So why the Middle Ages is usually you say is the worst period for them?
the reason it's the worst period is because there's so many expulsions, such as in France, in Hungary, in England. Um, there's outbreaks in northern Christian Spain, like 1391, if I remember correctly. So you have all these examples, and the reason why is because, for example, throughout the history of Christianity in Europe, they always saw the Jews as scapegoats. The reason for this is because they believed he killed, they believed they killed Jesus,
Hmm.
and in the Christian theology, Jesus is God. He's part of the Trinity. So they have this resentment towards the Jews. However,
Can
this
we also
increased.
say that because right after the Dark Ages, during the Middle Ages, Europe started having a better economic conditions, and they wanted to, get hold of that wealth before any other minority or power. Can we interpret it that way?
To be honest, no, no. This is what I think.
Hmm.
I think it's because of the Crusade. The
Hmm.
Crusades, they start like so Pope. The Pope is Yani is I can't remember his name, but one of the popes in 1095 made the proclamation of the First Crusade. But people forget. People forgot about it after the proclamation. So in 1096, the following year, um, a man in France. Oh, why is the name escaping me? Something the Hermit. He's called. He he tells people, "Oh, remember this? The Pope said to go fight for Jerusalem, fight to conquer Jerusalem." So the all these that's why it's called the People's Crusade because like not just the noble class, but everyone's going to fight in the name of Christianity, in the name of the Crusades. So um I think it's John the Hermit. They go in 1096, they massacre these Jews in the Rhineland or Saxony, some in Germany, they massacre while they're on their way to the Holy Land. So then there's other crusades and whatnot, such as the one, after Salahuddin conquered Jerusalem in 1187. There's another crusade. So in Christianity, there's a lot of zealous in their religion. There's a lot of, you know, there's that spirit of, hardcore Christianity and whatnot. So I don't think it's the economic because you have to think about it. At this time in Europe, there's poverty, it's the Dark
Exactly. This
Ages.
is one of the reasons why I'm saying it, because I remember during my studies, my professor was telling me one of the reasons why people were motivated to even join the Crusaders because of money. They
Hmm.
would promise, what do you call? They can loot the land, and there were people who prospered through that feudal system. Like especially if you were a noble and knight, then you can loot and you can get more money. And people were, rightly so, were in poverty. So don't you think? Because I heard this from a professor during my uni days, and I feel like I'm trying to connect. Could it be because of poverty that they were zealous?
Oh, I see what you mean. Definitely, definitely, because um, this is the thing with a lot of Christian nations is that when they were poor, their religiosity was high. But when they became prosperous, their religiosity became, diminished. And this is the same thing in Andalus. as much as Andalus was the ornament of the world, there was money, opulence. The Islamic uh, practices went down. You had music, dancing, you had all of this stuff. Do you get what I mean? So you find it throughout humanity that when there's poverty, religiosity increases, and when there's wealth and opulence, unfortunately, the religiosity decreases,
I think
which
this
is
is
very
the quote by
interesting
Ibn
because
Khaldun, yeah.
um of the 10 guaranteed Jannah, of the Sahaba, many were rich. Many were, businessmen like Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, Omar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, and many more on the list of the 10
The
guaranteed.
rich one would be Uthman radiallahu anhu and Abdurrahman ibn Auf.
Yeah,
These
so
are
these
the
are
rich ones, yeah.
rich. So yeah. So let me go back to the Ottomans. So Osman dies in 1324 at the same time that, you know, um, the first synagogue comes under Ottoman jurisdiction, and then his son Orhan comes into power, and he reigns from 1324 to 1361 during the conquest of Bursa, Ankara, Edirne, Gallipoli, whatnot. At the same time, he starts something very controversial that is often demonized against the Ottoman Empire, and that's the Janissary cause. So the Janissary comes from the Turkish word Janissary, which means new troops. And the justification for the Janissary cause is that in the Quran it says that 1/5 of the war spoils goes to the victor. Yeah. I can't remember what exact verse and ayah it is. Maybe you can put it on the screen later.
Spoils of
Um,
war, no, no, not really. Not familiar with much of the spoils of war, yeah.
yeah, so they use that as a justification. The saying that okay, cool, because we've conquered these lands in Europe. Because you have to think about it. Orhan is the one who reaches, Europe in the 1350s. Conquers Gallipoli's on in Anatolia. No, is it Anatolia? It's between Anatolia and when you get into Europe. Then he conquers Edirne and also Thrace around the same time. It reaches Thrace, sorry. So no, Edirne is in Thrace, but Thrace is literally in Europe. So he conquers. They start the conquest of Europe, and so as a justification, because they needed new troops, they needed soldiers that were loyal to the Sultan and to the dynasty, because at this time there was a lot of Turkish nobles that they would incorporate into um their system because they would conquer Anatolia and there was like Turkish nobility, beyliks and whatnot.
This is
So
why I
they would.
asked you. This is why I asked you which empire does it come under? Because you have the what do you call? You have the Indonesian archipelago, the
Mhm.
Muslims from there. You had the Indian subcontinent. You have Muslims in North Africa. So why didn't they join the Ottoman Empire? Why didn't they give? Because that was the last standing. What do you call? Caliphate. So why didn't they give bay'ah? And that's later on period. But I'm just saying, like, why couldn't they kind of already start um, bringing troops from the Muslim lands rather than what do you call taking Christian boys like the policy
Understand.
that you just told me.
Dervish. Okay, so you have to think about it. In the Muslim world in the 13th century, so when Osman is just about to start, the devastation caused by the Mongols. So the sacking of Baghdad, 1258, I
Mhm.
think 1 million people died. The rivers were flowing with black ink and all the books were ripped up. What happens later is that in 1261, I think, or a couple years later, the Mamluk Sultanate comes into power and they establish a new caliph in Baghdad. Some people say it's related to the former bastard caliph. Other people say he's just a random guy. We don't know. My teacher at Queen Mary, she said that maybe it's a random guy. Other books say so. There's a lot of historical debate regarding that. The Mamluk Sultanate, they're powerful. They usurp control from the Ayyubids. The Ayyubids had basically lost control, power, and whatnot. But the reason why Osman didn't join up with the Mamluks is because firstly, it's not connected. Secondly, in the history of in is throughout Islamic history, all rulers, what do they want? They want power. And this is no shade to them. This is no Yani saying that's bad because if we're in that position, who knows what we would do, what we'd want, how we
Mhm.
would go about conquering lands. That's why, the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, make dua for the ruler because the Muslim ruler, sorry, because the Muslim ruler has a fitna and has um an amana that we can never possibly imagine. So, um, you know, uh,
So
before
my
that question,
question
where are we
was
on?
like, why didn't other communities join the army of the Uthmani Khilafah
Oh no, they did. Sorry,
yeah,
they weren't a Khilafah
back
then.
then? Okay,
Back then, it was just a Beylik. Yeah,
okay.
Murad the first, when he becomes the ruler in 1361, he becomes the first Sultan.
Hmm.
So before they call themselves Ghazi, they're Beylik, whatnot, a chief, whatever. But then Murad becomes the first Sultan. They don't, and um, Osman and Orhan, they incorporate these other beyliks, sometimes through conquest, sometimes through diplomacy and whatnot. But mainly they focus on the Byzantines at that time. As I said, they were Ghazi, holy warrior. So at the same time when Orhan is conquering all these lands, Christians are coming under his jurisdiction. And many Christians actually like preferred the Ottoman rule over Byzantine rule. As I said, there was the civil war, the Paleologos dynasty during the last Byzantine dynasty were quite oppressive. Um, the clergy were quite tyrannical and they would abuse their power and whatnot. And this is not my words. This is in the book. I don't have it with me. I have books here that I'm going to show people later on. In the book, The Preaching of Islam by Thomas Walker Arnold. And as far as I know, he was not Muslim. He died like 100 years ago. He wrote the book in first time in 1898. Then he wrote another edition, and then his final edition was in 1913. And he shows how, Orhan, and then I'll get onto later sultans, the Christians took the Ottomans with open arms because the Byzantines were oppressive and tyrannical and whatnot. But let me also give you another thing about the Jewish situation under the Ottoman Empire. So, a rabbi by the name of Isaac Tazarfati, he writes to the Jews of northern France, Hungary, Swabia, which is like I think it's Germany, Rhineland, which is Germany, France, Styria, Moravia. So in Central and Northern Europe, he writes them the quote, "Here I found rest and happiness. The Jew in Turkey is not compelled to wear a yellow hat as a badge of shame, um, as in the case in Germany." And he finishes the quote by saying, "Arise, my brethren, gird up your loins, collect your forces, and come to us." So it shows you that this Jewish rabbi, he writes to the Jews that saying, "Come to us because we are not oppressed here. You know, we our situation is much better than in Europe." Because in the 1300s, the situation for the Jews was probably reached its climax. You've got um 13 1391, the Jews are expelled from France. And that was not the first time in the same century. There was 1309, somewhere around there, then 1321, um,
Yeah, Vienna, France, Moscow. There were a lot of pogroms going on, and most of them.
pogroms, a lot of. But in Russia, it's later on. But
Hmm.
in France, Germany,
England.
Central Europe, England. It was the height in the 14th century, in the 1300s. This was the height of Jewish persecution, Jewish expulsion in Europe.
So when
Uh,
the expulsion was happening, they were moving mostly across Europe rather than moving to. I mean, at that point, you had the North Africa, you have Maimonides from
mm.
I believe, the 12th century. So why didn't they actually move to North Africa? Why did they prefer to stay in Europe? Is it because it's hard to travel to? I mean, they were already persecuted, so why were they concentrated, most of them concentrated to the north? I mean, I know
Okay.
that they went to Poland and
Mhm.
Ukraine, that region, but other regions, do you have any knowledge about?
So it's much easier to go, for example, from northern France to southern France or to Germany than it would go to North Africa. You have to also think about it. A lot of the times when they'll expel and do these massacres and whatever the case may be, they'll take their wealth, they'll steal it, they'll destroy their wealth. So they didn't have that, you know, that
Means.
the means to go all the way to North Africa.
Hmm.
However, we have, as I said before, this rabbi, he says, "Come to us because you won't face the same persecution, the same discrimination that you do in Christendom."
So
So,
he was calling them
yeah,
towards Turkey, I mean, modern day
towards
Turkey, which
Turkey.
is Ottoman
Yeah.
Empire.
Ha the thing is with this quote, it's very like it's the quote is factual, but we don't know where it's written, like what year it's written. Some
Mm.
people say it was a century later. Some people say it was in the 14th century. What I take from Martin Gilbert, he says it was in the 14th, in the mid 14th century after these conquests of Bursa, Edirne, Ankara during that time.
Mhm.
Um, Another historian by the name of Diane Darke, I think her name, or Dark. She's not she's English or American, so I don't know why I put some pronunciation on her surname, but Diane Dark, she says in her book Ottomans, A Cultural Legacy, I think it was page 68 to 70 or 78 to 80. Somewhere in her book, she says that it was in the mid 15th century, but I don't know like if that was true. So yeah. I want to go back to the Janissaries, yeah. So with the Janissaries, we of course it was abhorrent in the sense that you just take someone's child and raise them up as soldiers. But at the same time, you still had people like Christian families that would give their children because they would want their child to, you know, get a high position because when you got the high position, they would then um give money back to their hometown. They wouldn't forget their hometown. So, for example, I took this example from Alan.
Yes.
Sokul Mehmed Pasha in the 16th century, he would, I think it was Bosnia, Serbia, around there.
Mhm.
Um, he was this Grand Vizier during the time of Suleiman the Magnificent, and then Selim the second. He would, um, you know, do mosques and do philanthropy, for lack of better words.
And he converted to Islam by himself, by his own, like his entire family converted to Islam.
Some
Um,
of his family, I'm not sure if his entire family converted to
I mean,
Islam.
he did say a part of his family, yes. He did say a
Yeah.
part of his family, yeah.
So
Willingly, that's the thing, right?
exactly. So we have so after Orhan we have Murad, and he institutionalizes the Janissaries. He conquers more land and
Can
whatnot.
you tell me one thing? I think, if I'm correct, I think it was Crash Course by John Green, where I saw like these, what do you call them? Janissaries, right?
Janissaries, yeah.
Janissaries where these boys were neutered. Is there any truth to that?
Okay, so we have eunuchs. Yeah, these are the people that they are you talking about when they
I don't know. I mean, I
you
just
castrated? Are you talking about
castrated, yes.
castrated? Yeah, I don't want to say the word. I don't wanna-
Yeah, neutered, I guess.
yeah, so what they would do is that
So when
in
did it
Islamic
happen?
law,
Did it happen? When did it happen? And what was the justification?
okay, so okay, so regarding eunuchs, these are people that are castrated. They'll normally get them from Africa. West African, East African, and they were always black. And the reason they were always black, the justification wasn't a racialized justification in the sense that they wanted to just castrate them and what you would find in the transatlantic slave trade and whatnot. The reason they would castrate them is that because if they because these eunuchs would be the guards of the imperial harem, yeah. So if they and because you're in close quarters with these women, sometimes things could go left and you're having affairs with these women of the harem. So the reason, so in a way to uh, you know,
Protect.
detect if they had children, is because these women in the harem were white. They were white like me. They were Serbian, Russian, Circassian, Greek, Chechen, all these places, yeah. So they'll so for example, if a eunuch was to gain his potency back, for a lack of better words, he would you would tell, oh, she had, an affair with that eunuch. So that's why they would, because imagine if they got a eunuch from North Africa or they got a eunuch from Europe and they had a child, oh, that could be the Sultan's child because you would have no way of telling. But
Hmm.
because they would be visibly black, the eunuchs, they would know, okay, cool, if they had a child with the one of the women in the imperial harem.
And these
So
were
yeah,
mostly Christian uh, men, right? The eunuchs.
to be honest, Christianity wasn't widespread in Africa during this time. It was
Hmm.
only in East Africa, and that's it. West Africa was Muslim and pagan. As in literally this same century, months in the 1400, 1300, sorry, months of Musa and whatnot. So yeah, that's and they would never get them already. They would never get them and then castrate them. They would bypass this law because in Islamic law you can't castrate. So they would buy them pre-castrated, already done and whatnot, and then they would buy them in these slave markets and whatnot.
Okay. Okay, so
And
they
that's what you find throughout Islamic history is that they would bypass laws. Like for example, let me give a because I was going to give a example of South Asia, but I'll give an example of Europe. For example, the Sakabila, which were Slavs from Eastern Europe, um, like modern day, like the Yugoslavia region, they would have these eunuchs, and they'll buy them already castrated from a young age, and then they'll bring them to the court. For example, Abdul Rahman III, the Caliph of Cordoba, had about 10,000 in his um palace in the Medina al-Zahra. So they'll to bypass these laws, they'll get them already castrated.
okay. So why don't religious scholars admonish this behavior? I mean, it's obviously not Islamic in any way. So why didn't they admonish it?
The thing is, I love the Ottoman Empire. I love Islamic history, yeah. But a lot of rulers would use scholars that suited their whims and their needs and their desires.
Yeah. Okay.
So, like, they would patronize scholars that would support their ideologies and their ways of thinking.
Yeah.
So they would just
Yes.
they'll get the scholar they'll get a fatwa from random scholar that said this is permissible, and this is how it is, bro. Like you can't say anything, and it's
No,
not me
it's true. It's
demonizing.
true with
It's
the
not
modern world as well.
it's not me demonizing because like when if you had that power of a ruler, you don't know what you would do, bro.
Mm.
Alhamdulillah, I'm not a ruler. Do you get what I mean? Like who knows? Like the power that you get is crazy. It's a fitna.
That's true. That's
So.
true. Yeah. We
Mhm.
spoke about the Janissaries. What other? I mean, we know a little bit about. I mean, Turkey with its care for animals, care for the elderly. So, for example, they had a walk for animals alone, the walk for what do you call elderly?
Mhm.
You even see the architecture how you have these little potholes where it collects rainwater for animals to drink from. Can you tell a little bit about the what do you call it? So when does it start? When does these kind of, care about animals? When does it start? Or is it already from the foundation?
It's always from the foundation because they see themselves as I said before, the like Ghazis, holy warriors. But also that comes with another thing that they're not just there to conquer, but they're also there to bring Islamic principles. They're trying to bring a society based on establishing Islam and its principles and norms and whatnot. So, you know, in masjids and stuff like that, and in the courtyards, you have, as you said, these places where water stays and, animals come to drink or like the drainage system. So it's not really a thing where they just adopt it in the middle of their empire. It's actually a thing where since the establishment of the
Can you give
Osmanli
some
dynasty,
examples? Can you give some examples? I understand about the architecture, but like about the Waqf system for animals, where retired animals are, what do you call? They benefit from the charity of people.
I can't give you like specific dates, but whenever they would establish like a big mosque, for example, in after the conquest of Constantinople and it turns into Istanbul, you have like the for example the Fatih Mosque in Istanbul, you have the Sultan Ahmed Mosque, which is built after, or the Suleymaniye Mosque or the Bayezid Mosque, and in these areas you have like wakaf
Waqf.
soup kitchens, you have madrasas, you have a whole basically community or things that needed for society established around the mosque. But it happens with every time they establish a mosque in a city they conquer, or even after 100 years, then the city they establish new mosques and they put these wakaf institutions and whatnot.
So yeah, I wanted to, and like get to some new innovations. So, for example, insurance policies or anything like that. Were there new inventions by the Ottomans that
So
people
one
benefit?
invention that is unknown in the Western world. Only probably people that actually study the history of medicine will know this. Is that in the 1700s, this lady called Lady Montagu, that's her name. She's like it's either her or her husband is an ambassador to Turkey, and the Turks in Istanbul, they have created a system how to prevent the spread of smallpox. And then they take, I think it's the thing where they get someone to get infected, so then they have that immunity, and then it like prevents the spread. Do you get what I mean? So she brings that to England, and then they have all this herd immunity stuff like that. So it actually originates from Istanbul, and they bring it to England.
So,
I'll try. I can't remember the exact word that it's called,
okay, no,
but
no reason. So,
yeah.
yeah, you were talking about the rise of the Ottoman Empire, like the expansions and stuff. So, we can
Mhm.
continue back then. Yeah.
All right. So we are at Murad the third first era. He continues the conquest in Europe. Um, Sofia around 1385, which is modern day Bulgaria. You've got Nis, which is a Serbian city, 1386. Thrace and the Macedonia regions, like Komotini, and which is in Western Thrace, continues, and he dies in the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. Even though he dies in the Battle of Kosovo, and the Serbian king, Lazar, dies in the Battle of Kosovo. And after the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, the Ottomans continue expansion into Europe. It's seen as like this victory for the Serbs and the Christians in Serbian folklore. But it's I don't know, even though like if you actually see what happens after, the Ottomans conquer more of Serbia and of the Balkans. It's mythologized. It's what's the word? It's seen as some heroic thing in Serbian mythology. So he dies in the Battle of Kosovo, 1389. His son, Bayezid I, comes into power, and he continues expansion into Europe. Um, for the next 10 years, up until 1402. So I'm just giving a brief summary up until the next Mehmed the second. So
Mm-hmm.
Bayezid the first, he up until 1402, which is the Battle of Ankara, where he gets defeated by the Timurids. So the Timurids originating from Central Asia, he sees himself as an heir to Genghis Khan, even though he's not a direct descendant. He has a like his lineage. He has a common ancestor with Genghis Khan, and so he's brutal. He goes through all the way to Anatolia, all the way to Ankara, which is in central Anatolia. He defeats him, and then he dies in captivity. Then this leads to the Ottoman interregnum between 1402 to 1413. Yeah. And so Bayezid's four sons, Mehmed Chalebi, Isa Chalebi, Suleiman Chalebi, and Musa Chalebi, they all fight. And so you have this civil war for like about 11 years. Mehmed the First, previously known as Mehmed Chalebi, he is
So
able
all
to
this is
establish
happening in
power
Europe or towards.
throughout so Anatolia and Eastern Europe, southern
Mhm.
Eastern Europe. Mehmed the First, he establishes control, he becomes victorious, and he's just trying to stabilize the empire. Then we have Murad the second. He rules from 1421 to 1444, and then from 1446 to 1451, because he abdicates for 2 years. He brings his son Mehmed II, who's like 13, 14 at the time, and
Mhm.
rules for 2 years. And then because he's just a 14-year-old boy, he can't establish power. So his Murad II comes back. So now we're now at Mehmed II, 1451. He comes to power. And as soon as he comes into power, he doesn't care anything else except to conquer Constantinople. It takes him about 2 years to conquer, to do the preparations. He builds fortresses such as the Romeli Hisari. Um, he builds up a large army and he begins the conquest of Constantinople in early April 1453. 100,000 soldiers about to siege. And the siege actually takes about between 40 to 50 days. And it ends. He finally conquers Constantinople
No, I
on the
saw the
29th of
memes
May.
like where they took the boat inside the city, right? They had to carry the boat. Is
In
that
Constantinople.
yeah.
Well,
I
I
think
haven't seen that meme, so
I've seen some memes like there's some memes about it, yeah.
yeah, he takes 29th of May, 1453, Constantinople falls to the Ottoman Empire. And it's a Tuesday, and he allows 3 days of pillaging. And you know what? I can come here and say, oh, the Ottomans were great, but of course there was it was not a utopia, it was not a dystopia. It was, of course, every empire has its good parts and bad parts. So there was 3 days of pillaging up until Friday, and then Friday he's like, you know what? He's actually not weeping, but he's distraught at the fact that all these like soldiers are just pillaging, and he's sad that this great city has been, pillaged to the. So it's like, you know what? End this pillaging. So on the Friday, he goes to the Hagia Sophia. He he prostrates. I think he does 2 rakats, and it turns into a masjid. So after that, he's focused on rebuilding the city because even before Constantinople has been besieged by um,
The Catholics towards the
previous.
Orthodox, yes.
Yeah, so in 1204 up until 1261, it was under Catholic rule. Then after that, it was besieged by the Ottomans, by Bayezid, um, I think even Murad the second and whatnot. And even during the Ottoman interregnum, one of the one of the um, people who were trying to fight for the throne, one of the sons of Bayezid, also tried to fight for it, but it just never came to fruition. So he tries to rebuild the city because in this point, once it was one of the greatest cities in the world after like centuries of, you know, Byzantine civil war, uh, sieges, pillages, everything. It's not a great city anymore. So he attempts to rebuild it. So he calls on people, Jews, Christians, to repopulate it. He also reestablishes the ecumenical patriarchate, which is basically the head of the Greek church in Constantinople. And he appoints a man by the name of Gennadios Scholarios. And so he is the head of the Greek church. And he has powers that were once held by the Byzantine emperor, because the Byzantine emperor was the head of the Orthodox Church, but now it's the ecumenical patriarchate, Gennadios Scholarios. But he doesn't just do this with the Greek church, he also does this with the Jewish population of Constantinople. So he appoints Rabbi Moses Kasparali along those lines, and he's the mediator between the Jews and the Ottoman government in Constantinople. And he also does it with the Armenian church. Hovhakim I, he becomes the head of the Armenian church in Constantinople. And this is what people say is the origins of the Malay system, where different religious minorities, to be honest, they weren't really religious minorities. The Christians were
Sex.
the Huh? No,
Different
no,
sex.
the Christians were the majority of the Ottoman Empire during this time. So he appoints all these rulers, and the Malay system is basically where you can have autonomy, you have your own courts, you have your own schools, you have your own you have your own community, and there's little interference by the Ottoman government. And yeah, so this is what happens with Mehmed II. And by the time it's 1478, so around 25 years after the conquest of Constantinople, there's over 1,600 Jewish households in in the city. So let's say 5 people per household. My maths is poor, yeah, but that's maybe about 10,000 people in 10,000 Jews in Constantinople. And I think around this time, the population of Constantinople increased by 80%. Or in the space of 25 years, it increased by 85%, 80%. And this is not my words, bruv, the book is not here. It's by Mark David Baer in his book, um, Khan's, Kais, Khan's, Kaisers, and Caliphs. And he talks about it in his chapter, Mehmed II, conquering Constantinople and stuff like that. So Mehmed II, he dies in 1481. The previous year in 1480, he tries to um, take power in southern Italy. And he's about to send reinforcements, but he dies in at the start of May. Some people say it was his physician, who was a Italian Jewish man. The name, sorry, it's escaping me, but he was Venetian, and what people say is that maybe he poisoned him because he didn't want him to conquer his homeland. Other people say maybe his son Bayezid II poisoned him. So in 1481, his son comes into power. Um, and Bayezid is different to Mehmed because Mehmed is seen as Fatih, the conqueror, because he conquers uh, Bosnia, like parts of Bosnia, Albania, Trebizond in Anatolia, and also Constantinople. But Bayezid's more of a Yani, he's more trying to consolidate power. He's more not a weak ruler, but he's very submissive in comparison to other rulers. So Bayezid II, the biggest thing that happens in his time is the Alhambra decree. In 1492, after the fall of Granada, um, the Jews are expelled from Spain. And then 5 years later, in Portugal, every single Jew is either forced to be expelled or convert. So you have some conversos in Spain, which are called the converted Jews, and Maranos in Portugal, which are Jews that are converted to Christianity. So you have different, like you find it throughout Spanish history, Portuguese history. They have names for different, like an ethnic, like a combination you'd never think of. They have a name for that. Like this is like a topic for another day. But like with in the Americas, they have all these different. They have like 20 names for different ethnicities, like half black, half white, half Native American, half no, one third Native American, one third black, one third white. It's crazy. They had all these different names for different ethnicities. Like why, like for example, a quarter Native American, three thirds white. It was crazy. So it is estimated that around 100,000 Jews were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula. And where did they go to? They went to the Ottoman Empire. Bayezid II sends um, Periris or Camaleries, one of them two, to collect the Jews and bring them to the Ottoman Empire. So they go to Acre in Lebanon, Syria, Jerusalem. Um, sorry, no, not Jerusalem. They go to Constantinople, they go to Sarajevo, and most importantly, Salonika in Greece. And he mocks the Spanish king, saying, "Oh, you call him a wise king? He has impoverished his land and enriched mine." And even a Jewish poet by the name of Samuel Usk, who was expelled from Spain, he says that the Jews were welcomed in like they were welcomed like it was Jerusalem. So in the aftermath, the Jewish population in Salonika is about 20,000, and it becomes a center of learning. The Jews engage in commerce, build their own synagogues, they establish their own religious courts, and so this is the start of Salonika being the like a center of Jewish culture in Europe. So that's what something very important that needs to be mentioned for Bayezid. Then Bayezid, his son, Selim the First, kind of rebels against him and get comes into power. And this is 1512. And Selim the First, also known as Selim the Grim, he's, you know, opposite to his father. He's a conqueror. Like he conquers Jerusalem, Medina, Mecca. Not the like actually conquer the two holy cities, Mecca and Medina, more like he conquers the Mamluk Sultanate and then the Sharif of Mecca gives bayah to him and whatnot. And after Jerusalem comes under his jurisdiction, the Jews are allowed to perform pilgrimage again. And you might ask, why is this the case? The reason for this is that the Mamluks, who controlled Jerusalem from 1250 to 1517, is that towards the end of their reign, Jewish access to Jerusalem was often restricted, and there was heavy taxes, and it was difficult for them to enter the city. However, Selim the First, using Islamic principles of the dhimma, the act like proper dhimma status, being merciful to the Jews, he allows them to perform pilgrimage with no restrictions, with ease. And what's very interesting, yeah, I was debating to put it in this section or later, is that according to the Jewish Israeli historian Amnon Cohen, after the conquest of Jerusalem in 1517, the period was from 1530 to 1601. There was over a thousand court cases by the Jewish population in Jerusalem. Nowhere else, just Jerusalem. They so that's why a thousand cases between 1530 to 1601 were taken up to the Sharia courts, not their own rabbinical courts, not their own Jewish courts that they were allowed to. They were not forced. They were not, pressured. They done it with eager because they felt that Islamic courts gave more justice. So it shows you that, subhanAllah, you know, they the Sharia courts were not this, scary thing that would oppress people. It was actually a system of justice.
Mhm.
Even though this happened between Suleiman's time, Selim's time, and Murad III's time, this is after, this was a byproduct of Selim's conquest of Jerusalem. So Selim the First comes into power in no, Suleiman the First comes into power in 1520. Selim the First dies same time, and Suleiman the First is the Sultan that epitomizes the extent and the power and the might of the Ottoman Empire. So he conquers Belgrade in 1521, Rhodes in 1522, and Buda in 1540. First, he does it at the Battle of Mohacs, but then they take it back, so he has to take it again in 1540. So the reason why I say this is because, firstly, in 1522, Jewish migration to Rhodes, which is a which was a Greek island near Anatolia, right next to Anatolia, sorry, he encourages Jewish migration, and the Jews see him as like a savior, just as was in Belgrade and Buda in Hungary. In Europe, whenever the Ottomans came, the Jews would see them as liberators because you know it's still early modern time, 15th, 16th century, the Jews are still persecuted in Europe. So, for example, in Rhodes, the Jews flourished. They had their own vineyards, they had their own manufacture of perfumes, textile trade. The Jews were very prosperous after the Ottomans came to Rhodes in 1522. But not also that, the one thing, yeah, the Jews were even allowed their own printing press. The Muslims weren't allowed their own printing press up until I think the 1800s. A Jewish family in Salonika established a press in 1527, and then 2 years later, in 1529, by the Sonkino family, which were they were expelled from Spain and they came to the Ottoman Empire. And furthermore, Suleiman the Magnificent had his own um, had Jews in his court. So he had a man by the name of Moses Hamon, which was his personal physician. And if if you don't know what a personal physician is, it's someone that is your personal doctor, and he will look at your most intimate parts, from your teeth to more, intimate parts. So he's there. He's the right hand man of the of the of the Sultan. Then you also had Abraham. We don't know his surname. They just used to call him Abraham the Jew. Uh, I know, and he was a silversmith, basically making silver and whatnot. And then also a man by the name of Don Joseph Nasi, who was his closest advisor, and he negotiated treaties with Poland, the Habsburgs, and France during the 1550s. So this Jewish man was literally negotiating treaties at the height of Ottoman power. So it wasn't just some random guy. He was the right-hand man, the advisor, and probably the most powerful person after the Sultan. And Don Joseph Nasi became so powerful that he had his own principality called the Duchy of Naxos in modern day Palestine and stuff like that. It was in the Cyclades archipelago, and also he was the court banker as well, so he would deal with the money and whatnot. Another case of Suleiman showing mercy to the Jewish people is that between 1530 to 1545, a blood libel rumor was spread across the empire. An Armenian woman accused a Jewish man of murdering a Christian boy and using it as a ritual for Passover. So what happened next is that several Jews were arrested, but then these Christians were found out to be lying, that like this ritual was BS, it was just an accusation by the Christians. So what happened? This led to Moses Hamun, the personal physician to Suleiman, to ban the accusation of blood libels, and that's what he done. So that was around 1545. Yeah. that's another example of that, even though there was these um, issues of blood libel accusations, it originated from a Christian
Rumors.
woman, yeah, a rumor, and it and the Sultan came to intervene and help the Jews. So it shows you. But let me give you another example of what happened. So there was a great fire a few years later in Salonika at the start of the 1550s, and a synagogue was burnt to the ground. A catastrophic fire, and Suleiman I granted permission for the for the synagogue to be rebuilt. You know when they say, "Oh, Muslims don't Islamic law, Sharia law doesn't allow for the rebuilding of churches and synagogues." This is not actually, from what I found, maybe someone needs to correct me. I haven't found this in the Hadiths or I haven't found this in the Quran. This is a from the Pact of Omar, but even some of the things in the Pact of Omar is a forgery in the sense that some of the more harsh, and it's not me being a Muslim propagandist, this is historians saying this, that some of the harsh um, rulings in the Pact of Omar are actually a forgery. So, for example, you can't rebuild churches and you can't rebuild synagogues. In reality, we don't know if it's right. We don't know if it's correct, if it was actually said or if it wasn't said. So he allows the Jews to rebuild the synagogue in 1551. And so,
I think it's mostly, I don't know, but like, I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in this, but I think it's mostly about like, investing Muslim money into Christian property. So using the Muslim funds to build. So is that what was happening?
um, to be honest, I don't know if he rebuilt it or it was used of funds, but there was permission to rebuild. So
Mhm.
it shows like this is just one example I wanted to show because people will often say, "Oh, they banned and they didn't allow for the rebuilding of synagogues and churches and holy uh, w places of worship of non-Muslims."
Mhm.
So also another thing about Suleiman the Magnificent is that in Ancona, a port city in Italy, the Maranos, the Portuguese converts to Christianity, but they're actually crypto Jews practicing Judaism secretly. They thought, all right, cool. We're outside of the Iberian Peninsula. We can practice Judaism freely. This angered the Pope Paul IV, who was like, how dare they, um, you know, apostate, basically. And Pope Paul IV was quite a zealous pope, yeah. He reorganized the Spanish Inquisition and whatnot. So he was like, you know what? Arrest these Jews. Their property was seized, and they had to convert to Christianity on the pain of death. So what Suleiman did, he intervened, and he said that you need to stop this. Unfortunately, he was only able to save the Ottoman citizens. The non-Ottoman citizens were burned at the stake, unfortunately. So this is this is a sad case that he done his best, but he couldn't save all of them. And Suleiman the Magnificent is also not just you know, like all of these things. He also, when he done his new laws. He's called Kanuni in the in the Turkish, sorry, language, Suleiman Kanuni, because he codified and harmonized um, the laws in the Ottoman Empire. And one case of him showing his mercy to the people is that he got all the qadis in the different cities, towns, villages to read out the rules. So he wasn't this sultan that he was like the Ottoman sultans weren't these people that were just trying to oppress people. They actively tried to show, okay, these are the rules that the state abides by. You need to follow these and whatnot. So it wasn't a thing where, the law, you didn't know the laws and you could break them, or the Ottoman sultans would just come and arrest you out of nowhere. Is not the case. Just to wrap up, Suleiman, he rules from 1520 to 1566, and as you can see, he has all these examples of mercy and tolerance and coexistence with the Jewish people. Now, let's move on to his son, Selim II, who comes to power in 1566. And Selim II is polar opposite to his father, Suleiman I. The reason for this is that Selim II is he drinks, he's more focused on the pleasures of this life. Suleiman I, even though he had his wife Roxolana, the first Ottoman Sultan to actually marry his a woman from the Haram. He's still like on this mission, conquering, doing like harmonizing law, being a legal reformer, and all the like he marks the pinnacle of Ottoman power. But Selim II, like we see a little decline with Selim II because he's not very like as the previous sultans. This is where the sedentary sultans start to appear. However, one small island by the name of Cyprus does get conquered in this during this time in 1571. The Jews and Christians see the Ottomans as liberators. They see the Muslims as liberators. The reason for this is that a traveler in 1508, and this can be found in the book The Spread of the Preaching of Islam by Thomas Walker Arnold in the at the start of the Ottoman section. I think it's chapter 5 or chapter 6. A traveler to Cyprus says that the inhabitants of Cyprus are slaves to the state. And who's ruling Cyprus at the time? The Venetians. And every single individual, is obliged to pay a third of their income. Of course, not like a child who's not working, but everyone who's working is forced to pay a third of their yearly income to the state. Furthermore, every man is has to work 2 days a week for free, no pay, no nothing. So they're basically every single person that's able to work is legal property of the Venetian state in Cyprus. So of course, when the Muslims come, they see the they see them as liberators, and that's why in Cyprus people convert. That's why there was not much resistance to Muslim rule in Cyprus. Selim II's reign actually is very short though, 1566 to 1574, and he doesn't lead the campaign like Suleiman in Belgrade and Rhodes and Buda. No, not sorry, not Buda. Battle of Mohacs in 1526, or Mehmed in Constantinople. He lets his advisors, his vizier, his soldiers do the dirty work for him. He dies in 1574. Then Murad III comes to power in 1574. And during Murad's time, it's very mixed because the Jews and Christians are treated well, but at times they're not treated well. It's based on what he thinks at the time. So, for example, a Jewish traveler, sorry, a French traveler from Marseille by the name of Vincent Leblanc in 1579 writes that the Christian and Jews are as free as the Turk to put forward the least complaint. So, for example, this is his exact word, and what he means is that even the most petty of issues, the most petty of problems, a Jew or a Christian can front that issue to the court, to the powers that be at the time, and they don't need a lawyer to defend the truth. And he says, being far less partisan, the administration of justice is also carried out more honestly. So it shows that, so it shows that, you know, the Ottoman Empire, the judiciary system was not some anti-Christian, anti-Jewish, oppressive, tyrannical, system. It was try to implement justice, subhanAllah. So yeah, that's what one traveler says. Also, the court advisor to Murad III was David Passy, who was a Jewish man who gave him valuable financial matters on domestic and foreign policy. And another Marano, the Portuguese Jew by the name of Don Álvaro Mendes, also known as Soliman ibn Yaish, served as a consular, so like an advisor to Murad III, and helped him to establish close relations with England. So at the time, yeah, and I got mixed response with this video on TikTok, yeah. At the time when what's her name? Elizabeth I came to power in the mid 16th century, England was broke. Why? Because King Henry VIII, her father, had a debt of around £300,000 at the time. Who knows how much that fee is right now? That could be millions or billions. Do you get what I mean?
Mhm.
So she in um, in 1570 she got excommunicated by the Pope. So she's looking for allies, and at the time Europe is predominantly Catholic. So she looks for allies, and main ally, one main potential of allyship is the Muslims in the east, Murad III. So there's exchanges between them two. So they send letters to each other, and this Jewish man by the name of Suleiman ibn Yaish is the actual like he's like part of this exchange. And so there's trade between the Ottoman Empire and England, and this kind of helps England stay afloat.
Can
And
I
let me
ask
just
you,
get one
can I
more thing
interrupt you
before
there?
okay.
We had like almost three interviews together, and always it's in the highest position it's always a Jew. Um, I mean, rarely we see a Christian being as a, like, is it because they if they're the prosecution or something, or is it because why? If you might just like to analyze or something, yeah.
So the reason why like Jews would gain power, like have a high position in the court, can be down to many things. Is that like there's a emphasis maybe in their culture of trying to become smart, trying to become knowledgeable, trying to become canny and cunning and whatnot. So they have a kind of a culture of being
Experts and anything.
experts in these high positions.
Or is it also
But also in
because of their
you don't
persecution? Yeah.
you don't also have just Jews in the high position. There's also Christians. For example, I know this about Ottoman Empire, but in Andalus, um, a bishop by the name of Resamund or Revamund, he was quite powerful, and he was one of the advisors and one of the viziers to Caliph Abdul Rahman III. He actually goes to Otto the First of Germany to get a new letter because basically John Gorzo, the right-hand man to Otto the First, who sent a very what's the word the letter, this letter that that Otto the First sent that John Gorzo had to bring to the Caliph was very insulting to Islam and the Prophet of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Mhm.
Has that ibn Shaprut, a Jewish man?
You mentioned that name, yes. No, it's
Yeah,
just like, you know,
but let me.
okay.
I'm gonna go back to it. Has that ibn Shaprut was trying like very clever. He was like, okay, this letter. I think this letter will have insulting messages. So he basically got John Gurso to admit that the letter had negative words and whatnot. So then Hasdai ibn Shaprut sent Resamund to Otto the First, and it took about 3 years to get a new letter that was more inviting and, for lack of better words, nicer to the Caliph and Islam and the Deen. So, and also, even in the early times of Andalus, there was Christian viziers and whatnot, and even I think if I remember correctly, during the Abbasid times, when the Abbasids were powerful, they had Christians in their courts. So it's not just Jews, but Jews always have it's I think they've outweighed Christians, but you do find Christians.
Okay. So you were
So
talking about,
yeah,
yeah,
go ahead, sorry.
you were talking about what do you call it?
Murad the third.
Yeah, Murad II.
So yeah, as I was saying about the correspondence between the Ottoman Empire and England. At the start of Queen Elizabeth's reign, England were like poor, broke, and whatnot. She sends the letter in 1579 to Murad, and she says, "Oh, let's be allies. Look, the Catholics idol worship. We don't like the Catholics. We're fighting against the Catholics because you have to think about it. The Ottomans were fighting against the Austrians, the Austrian Empire, the Habsburgs, who were the Catholic thing, and also Spain. There in the Mediterranean and whatnot, there was a lot of battles between the Spanish and the Ottomans and the Portuguese because they were Catholic. So Islam and Catholicism, but with these two empires were fighting, and so she looked for the Sultan as a new ally. However, of course, England kind of started their like a little golden age afterwards because they defeated the Spanish Armada in 1588 and after I think 1607 the first colony in Jamestown in America. So what when I say that because I got flack from this from the English people, yeah. When I say that Queen Elizabeth inherited problems and they were weak. However, of course, she was a phenomenal monarch who was able to establish what's the word? A like secure a good throne like afterwards. So that's one thing. However, of course, with Murad, um, like there was bad things that happened during his reign. For example, in the same time in 1579, in that same period, he saw a Jewish lady wear jewelry worth around 40,000 ducats in gold. So that is like maybe he's exaggerating, but that's like crazy. Like a lot of jewelry, expensive jewelry, and he got angry for some reason, maybe jealousy, whatnot. And so he was like, you know what? I want to eliminate the entire Jewish population. However, Solomon Ashkenazi, which who was a trusted advisor of the Grand Vizier that we talked about before, Soluku Mehmed Pasha, the Serb who went through the Dervishme system and became Grand Vizier, which is the second most powerful position officially in the empire. Um, he also this Solomon Ben Ashkenazi or Solomon Ashkenazi was a he was he he was a part of diplomatic relations between Venice and the Habsburgs as well. He manages to persuade the Sultan Murad to not do this. He bribed him with money, they raised money and whatnot, and that never happened. But it showed that yes, there was Murad. There was times where Jews had held high positions, but also there was times where he didn't like that they were powerful and they had money. Um, but at this like 6 years later, what happens? That Solomon ibn Yaish, the guy that was a consular to Murad, he becomes so successful in advancing Ottoman diplomatic interests in for the empire that he was ennobled as the Duke of Mytilene, which is a city in Greece. So you had previously Don Joseph Nasi as a had a little principality, and now you had Solomon ibn Yaish who had his own principality. So it shows that like maybe that time when Murad wanted to destroy the whole Jewish population was just out of jealousy and maybe he was not thinking straight.
Mhm.
Um Murad he rules up until 1595. So the next Sultan that I want to talk about, you have Murad III. After that, you have a few sultans and whatnot. The next Sultan, who I think is very important to know as someone who wants to if anyone wants to learn more about the Ottomans, who likes the Ottomans, it's Mehmed IV. And he rules from 1648 to 1687. So this is about 50 years after Murad III. And he was different from the old sultans because the previous sultans from around Selim the first, no, Selim the second, up until Mehmed the fourth, they were becoming more sedentary. So they would allow their grand viziers, they would allow their advisors, their counselors, their people in the court to do the daily runnings of the empire. But he was different. Mehmed the fourth was like, you know what? Something needs to change. So he brings a mini revival. Some people say this is from Selim the second to just after Mehmed's death, because I'll get into why he was a good ruler at times and bad ruler at times. They call it transformation. For me, I see it as like a mini decline and then a revival. The reason for this is that Mehmed IV, he modeled himself on the old sultans, like a pious, mobile, virtuous Ghazi, like a ho holy warrior, yeah? Like Osman the First, Orhan, Murad the First, Yani Bayezid the First, up until Suleiman the First. You know, like these people ho fighting for the sake of Islam. Uh, so you know how the sultans would normally reside in Istanbul? He changed where he would reside. Instead of Istanbul, he went to the frontier province of Edirne. So instead of being surrounded by wealth, opulence, he went to Edirne, which was closer to Europe to wage war. So one thing about him is that he unsuccessfully invaded the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1673 and 1672 and 1673. He managed to acquire a fort, and I can't remember what the fort was called, but it was like a famous fort. But apart from that, he didn't like acquire much more gain. So most people deem it unsuccessful or inconclusive. But one thing he did do was convert a lot of people to Islam. It's said that thousands of Jews and Christians converted to Islam during his rule. The reason for this is that he was zealous in Islam. He was doing dawah, he was preaching specifically when he would go on these hunting raids. He was called Mehmed the Hunter, and he would go hunting on horseback and go to different populations doing dawah and converting people to Islam. And according to an English ambassador by the name of John Koval, 200 people converted to Islam in just 13 days because of um, his preaching and whatnot. Um, Another thing during his reign is something very controversial, is that a Jewish man by the name of Sabati Zevi claimed himself to be the Messiah, and this is in the year 1665.
It was during his time, okay.
Yeah, this is why. Look, it's all coming together, right? So he calls himself the Messiah, and he a lot of people start
Have a
following
following.
him.
He starts
Yeah,
having a
he
following,
gets
yeah.
like tens of thousands of followers. And what happens is that people stop paying the jizya. People stop paying taxes because they think the following year he'll be called the emperor of the world, the king of the world. So of course this causes fitna. People are not paying taxes. People are just there's widespread discontent and revolt. So what he does is he suppresses it. He brings um, Sabati Zevi to his court, and through certain means he becomes Muslim, and the his people, his followers, they disperse and whatnot, and people and a lot of the Jewish people there become Muslim. And this will be a topic for another day. But all these Jews that converted to Islam were called the Donme, and they have a little role to play in the end of the Ottoman Empire
Yeah, I
and the
heard that
Young
they are
Turks.
connected with the Kemalists.
Yeah, but that'll be a topic for another day because that is a
Yes.
whole. I have a book not here in in my personal library, literally about the Donme. So inshallah, I'll read that, get more information, and then bring it here.
Inshallah, inshallah.
So that's what happens, and people say, oh, converted him to Islam forcefully. That's wrong. but there was widespread discontent. There was widespread, there was a it was a popular movement. Lots of people in different cities were causing fitna. So of course you had to crush the leader, the
Rebellion.
the of the rebellion. So that's what happens. Um, what else happens in his reign? Crete, the island of Crete, probably the last Muslim conquest. Uh, Crete is conquered in 1669 during his reign. And subhanAllah, it was actually once a Muslim ruled. Yeah. This is I'm gonna give a little backstory, yeah. So Hakam the First, the Andalusi ruler from 1796 to 1822. No, 796 to 822. He's Al-Hakam the First, he's the ruler of Al-Andalus, and he's oppressive. He's an open sinner because he's drinks wine. He allows the sale of wine. He uses the profits and the income used from the sale of alcohol for his own personal use and for his and the use of the state. And so this causes a little rebellion in Cordoba in 818.
Mhm.
Yeah. And he goes like after that rebellion, he goes crazy. The soldiers of the Andalusi um, army or his soldiers, they destroy the quarter. I think it's called Shakunda, the quarter, if I'm not mistaken. And then there these all these people in that quarter of Cordoba, Shakunda, are forcibly expelled. They have to leave. So they first go to Alexandria. Then afterwards, from Alexandria, they go to Crete in 827 and they conquer the island of Crete. And it actually stays as a Muslim ruled entity, as an emirate, for about 130 years, just under 140 years, from 827 to 961. And according to the historian Thomas Walker Arnold, which I implore every single Muslim to read his book, The Preaching of Islam, he was not a Muslim, he just used every source he could find in the British Library. So some of the British Library in the 19th century were anti-Islamic, anti-Muslim. He says that half of the population there were Muslim by the time the Byzantines reconquered it in 961. And later on, they became Christian again. More specifically, he said Greek and Armenian Orthodox. So that's what happens. Then it changed different hands. Then by 1204, the the Venetians had acquired Crete from Boniface of Montferrat. And Boniface of Montferrat is a basically a what was he? He was part of the Crusaders that conquered Constantinople, from the Greeks,
Mhm.
the Byzantines, and they pillaged it and they acquired other lands from the Byzantines. And Boniface Montferrat held it for a year or so. So the Venetians acquired it. However, their rule was oppressive and tyrannical. For example, places like Safatki and Licity, which are in Crete, were almost depopulated, and they were forbidden for some reason under the pain of death to sow corn. So they couldn't even do certain agricultural practices. And so these regions became barren and uncultivated for centuries. And the local Greek population was treated as second-class citizens. Um, each peasant, same way in Cyprus, they had to work for free, 12 days a year, forced labor with no payment. And so this caused many people to revolt against the Venetian government. So that's why when the Ottomans conquered Crete in 1669, many people saw the Turks as liberators.
Mhm.
And so many people converted to Islam.
And this was
And
under Muhammad the Fourth. Mehmed the Fourth.
Mehmed IV, yeah. And so in Crete, you have the highest conversion rate to Islam amongst the Greek-speaking world. So, Anatolia, Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, like the conversion rate to Islam in Crete is comparable to Bosnia and Albania. And we all know Bosnia and Albania were the highest people that converted to Islam. They're the only Muslim majority nations in Europe alongside Turkey.
So here's
So
my question. When Mehmed IV was conquering, because I know that the Europeans have a bitterness towards the Ottomans. Is it I mean they willfully ignore, I mean, what do you call? They willfully ignore the Andalusian era, but I've
yeah,
noticed they have this bitterness towards, I mean, they glorify the Austrian what do you call, defeat towards the Ottomans, especially with the croissant or whatever, and then the Polish-Lithuanian thing that you were talking about. So there's often an emphasis on the defeat of the Ottomans.
yeah.
So mm, what was happening? Um, is it because of the Crusaders thing and stuff? Because
Okay.
here you see a big chunk of population converting to Islam, but there's also bitterness towards this belt.
The Ottomans. Okay. So it's a mixture of misconceptions, false narratives of history, and the realities of history.
Mhm.
So one thing is that the rise of nationalism created this anti-Ottoman um, narrative. The reason for this is that when you, for example, the Serbs, they created their nation. They needed an enemy to galvanize the population. The Romanians needed an enemy to galvanize to unite the people. And so you find that throughout the Balkans that all these nations to create unity, they forged a narrative of Ottomans done this, Ottomans done that and whatnot. Another thing is that uh, they like these misconceptions about um, the Ottomans, they force converted people, which you only find with the Janissaries, with the Dervish system that they would collect these boys from the Balkans and convert them to Islam. Apart from that, they didn't just go out converting people like forcefully to Islam. So it's all of these combinations mix, and you have a a
No,
situation
that,
where they
that's
hate.
even later. I'm talking about within the period, like let's say Mehmed IV, when people are converting. What is the reason that that there is a growing concern of sense of animosity towards the Ottoman Empire? From, I mean, that's how they kind of assembled the Crusaders, right?
Yeah, but the Crusaders were about 300 to 600 years before Mehmed IV. Within the Ottoman Empire, within the Balkans, you don't get lots of rebellions and whatnot up until the 1800s.
Mhm.
So it shows that people were not discontented. They didn't hate Ottoman rule because if
No,
they
no, I'm
did
talking
hate,
about the Austrian, the Polish, Lithuanian Commonwealth, and the Austrian, the part where the Ottomans have not conquered yet.
oh, the reason why they hate the Ottomans,
Yeah.
are you saying? Oh,
Yes.
the reason for this is that it's the biggest empire that are causing them problems. Like the the Ottoman Empire had borders with the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Lithuanian Commonwealth, and so they were always at odds, battling each other, taking each other's lands. So of course, resentment will stir between the two. That's why the Christians that were actually treated the worst in the Ottoman Empire, in the early Ottoman Empire, were the Catholics, because you had the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, you have the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and these Catholics within the Ottoman Empire were seen as like a fifth column that could betray the Ottoman Empire. But at the same time, there wasn't many Catholics within the Ottoman Empire. You only had Croatia and parts of Albania. But still, in comparison to the Orthodox Christians, they had their own Malay systems. They had all these benefits. So that's why the Ottomans were disliked by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, no, the Habsburg, sorry, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, because they were always at odds with each other. So that animosity would stir and increase. So as I was saying regarding Crete, um, Crete has the highest conversion rate across the Greek world and Greek speaking world and rivals conversion rates with Albania and Bosnia. And by the time it's the mid 1800s, 47 to 50% of Crete was Muslim. And most, a large proportion of these Cretan Muslims were Greek. They spoke Greek. And even the Turks that came to migrate, because there was a lot of migration, Turks would go to Crete, they would go to Albania, Bosnia, they'll go all around the Ottoman Empire and settle and whatnot. These Turks that settled in Crete had to speak the Greek language. However, they'll call the Cretan Turks because of their religion. But unfortunately, Crete's Muslim population right now, I don't know what it is right now, but it went from 50% to 0% within uh 70 years. So you have revolts,
Persecution, or is it because of people converting or people
uh,
leaving the land?
mostly leaving the land because they don't want to they get expelled, they leave the land. They don't want to be under Christian rule or non-Ottoman rule because they see what happened to, the Muslims across the Balkans during the Ottoman contraction. About 5 to 10 million Muslims were killed. Sorry, 5 to 9 million Muslims were killed from uh, Circassia, Chechnya to the Balkans to Crimea. They're all so they didn't want the same um, outcome. So a lot of people would flee, and also the Turkish-Greek population exchange of 1923. A lot of the Cretan Muslims, the Cretan Turks, they went from Crete to Turkey because they would be with people that were Muslim. Of course, we know what happens with Ataturk and his um, liberalizing policies and whatnot.
So far, this is the rise of the Ottomans. So I think you already touched upon the contraction and everything. So I think in the next episode we'll continue with the what happens, why did the Ottoman Empire started collapsing,
Yeah,
and what are the consequences and everything, inshallah.
inshallah,
Sure.
inshallah.
Barakallahu fiqh, Pablo.
Well,
So
yeah,
hopefully
Jazakallah
we'll
khair.
connect once again then.
Jazakallah khair.
So, Barakallahu fiqh. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.